And let there be no mistakes about this. Whoever governs Singapore must have that iron in him, or give it up. This is not a game of cards. This is your life and mine. I've spent a whole lifetime building this. And as long as I'm in charge, nobody's going to knock it down.
In the heart of Southeast Asia lies a city-state unlike any other. A gleaming metropolis of steel, glass, and greenery, where efficiency meets elegance and order births opportunity. But this wasn't always the case. Barely a generation ago, Singapore was a struggling, mosquito-ridden outpost, scarred by colonial rule, racial tensions, and uncertain survival. And then came a man with a vision. Lee Kuan Yew, founding father, prime minister, statesman, architect of modern Singapore. In a world fraught with revolution and failed promises, Lee built not just a nation, but a blueprint for governance, rooted in meritocracy, discipline, and ruthless pragmatism. Under his stewardship, a vulnerable island with no natural resources transformed into one of Earth's most prosperous and stable societies. He led through crisis, planned for generations, and reshaped a people's identity forever. This is the story of Lee Kuan Yew, the man who defied the odds and willed a nation into existence. Long before the skyscrapers and super trees, Singapore was a colonial outpost of the British Empire, a humid, crowded trading port at the crossroads of East and West. Born on the 16th of September, 1923, Lee Kuan Yew entered the world in a modest bungalow along Kampong Java Road. He was the eldest son of Lee Chin Koon and Chua Jim Neo, ethnic Chinese of Straits settler heritage. Nicknamed Harry in his youth, Lee was part of the English-educated elite, a product of both Asian tradition and British schooling. From an early age, he stood out, not just for his intellect, but for his fierce sense of purpose. At Raffles Institution, he topped his class, but the world around him was changing. By the time he turned 18, World War II had reached Southeast Asia. In 1942, Singapore fell to the Japanese. The British surrender shocked Lee and shattered his belief in imperial invincibility. During the brutal 3-year occupation, Lee saw cruelty, hardship, and the fragility of freedom. But he also saw something else: how ordinary people could survive, adapt, and endure. To survive, Lee worked as a clerk for Japanese firms. But even then, he was studying privately, quietly, plotting a different future. When the war ended, Lee pursued that future with unshakable resolve. He sailed to England and in 1947 enrolled at the University of Cambridge. There, he read law and excelled. He graduated with first-class honors in law. But Lee didn't stay in Britain. He returned home, not to enjoy success, but to fight for something greater: freedom, justice, and a new Singapore. He married his Cambridge classmate, Kwa Geek Chu, a brilliant lawyer in her own right. For over 6 decades, she was his confidant, his equal, and his anchor. They raised 3 children, including future Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. Lee spoke rarely of emotion, but after her passing in 2010, he admitted, "Without her, I would be a diminished man." In private letters and quiet glances, their bond revealed a man of depth, shaped not just by politics, but by devotion. The British Empire had educated him. The Japanese occupation had hardened him. But it was Singapore that would define him. Singapore in the 1950s was a city of unrest. The war was over, but the wounds of occupation remained. Jobs were scarce, inequality was rife, and the people had grown tired of colonial rule. As nationalism surged across Asia, so did a generation of young intellectuals and activists. Among them, a returning lawyer named Lee Kuan Yew. Lee began his career not in parliament, but in the trenches of labor law, representing postal workers, dockers, and busmen. He gave voice to those without one. But legal advocacy wasn't enough. In 1954, Lee co-founded the People's Action Party, which fused anti-colonial ambition with a fierce commitment to multiracial unity and disciplined governance. The PAP wasn't just another protest movement. It was a vehicle for radical change, backed by a coalition of English-speaking professionals and Chinese-speaking trade unionists, including underground communists. In 1955, Lee was elected to the Legislative Assembly. He quickly emerged as a powerful orator, challenging British authority and local apathy. But the coalition that brought the PAP to power would not last. As Cold War tensions gripped Southeast Asia, Lee made a fateful choice: to align with the West and purge the party of its communist wing. In 1963, under Operation Cold Store, over 100 leftist activists were arrested, without trial. To his critics, it was authoritarianism. To Lee, it was survival. That same year, Lee led Singapore into a merger with Malaysia. It was his boldest gamble yet, joining the Federation as a stepping stone to full independence. The young lawyer had become prime minister, But the storm was far from over, for ahead lay a battle not just for power, but for Singapore's very identity. By the early 1960s, Singapore stood at a crossroads. Still technically a British colony, it had achieved self-government but was not fully independent. And Lee Kuan Yew knew that going alone was not an option. His solution? Merger with Malaya to form a unified federation of Malaysia, a single nation built on shared language, economy, and identity. In 1962, Lee campaigned aggressively for the merger, describing it as essential for economic survival and protection against communist threats. In a national referendum, 70% voted in favor. On September 16, 1963, Singapore became part of Malaysia. It was a proud moment. But beneath the surface, trouble was already brewing. Almost immediately, tensions flared. The Malaysian government, dominated by ethnic Malays, pushed pro-Malay policies under the banner of Bumiputera rights. Lee, in contrast, championed a Malaysian Malaysia, where all citizens were treated equally. What followed was a bitter war of words. The racial divide deepened. Riots erupted in 1964, leaving lives lost and communities shaken. It was clear the dream of the merger was turning into a nightmare. And behind closed doors, leaders in Kuala Lumpur had made a decision. On August 9, 1965, Singapore was expelled from Malaysia. In a televised press conference that day, Lee said, "For me, it is a moment of anguish. All my life, I have believed in the merger and the unity of the two territories. It breaks everything we have stood for. Singapore had been cast out, unwanted and alone. No army, no water supply, no natural resources, and surrounded by geopolitical uncertainty. In that moment, the man who had fought for unity now had to build a nation from scratch. And he would, brick by brick, law by law, vision by vision." In August 1965, Singapore was an accidental nation. Its independence was not won on the battlefield, nor gifted by grace. It was thrust upon it. With no natural resources, hinterland, and standing army, most thought it would fail. Even Lee Kuan Yew called it a political absurdity. But where others saw despair, he saw possibility. And with fierce conviction, Lee embarked on one of the most ambitious nation-building projects of the 20th century. Lee's priority was to build a government that people could trust. Corruption was rooted out. Public officials were paid well, but held to the highest standards. The message was simple: competence over connections, integrity over influence. In the 1960s, 2/3 of Singaporeans lived in squalid conditions. Lee launched the Housing and Development Board, HDB, to fix that. Within 5 years, over 100,000 affordable homes were built. By the 1980s, nearly every Singaporean would own one. But homes meant little without jobs. So Lee turned to industrialization. His government built factories in Jurong, a swampy wasteland, and invited foreign companies to set up shop. He promised stability, cheap land, and most of all, skilled, English-speaking workers. It worked. Exports surged. Unemployment fell. Singapore's port became one of the busiest in the world. Lee knew that a country's most valuable asset wasn't oil or gold. It was its people. He overhauled the education system to reward merit, not privilege. English became the common language, ensuring Singapore could compete globally, while mother tongues preserved cultural roots. He also wanted a city that worked, and that shone. Lee's clean and green vision transformed Singapore into a meticulously planned metropolis. Littering was banned. Roads were smooth. Traffic was efficient. Trees lined every street. The goal? A first-world oasis in a third-world region. But Lee's Singapore was not a liberal democracy. Civil liberties were often sacrificed for efficiency. Strikes were outlawed. The press was tightly managed. To Lee, freedom without discipline was chaos. And he was determined to avoid the fate of post-colonial countries that descended into disorder. By the late 1970s, the world took notice. Singapore had become a global business hub, a model of governance, and a beacon of what could be achieved when leadership met vision and vision met resolve. Lee Kuan Yew had not just defied the odds. He had rewritten them. By the end of the 1980s, Singapore stood transformed. A city-state once dismissed as a failed experiment had become a global success story. For over 3 decades, Lee Kuan Yew had led from the front, often with clenched fists and relentless will. But now it was time to let go. On November 28, 1990, Lee officially stepped down as Prime Minister, handing the reins to his longtime deputy, Goh Chok Tong. It was the first peaceful leadership transition in Singapore's history, a deliberate move designed to show that the system, not just the man, could endure. But Lee did not retreat from politics. Instead, he became senior minister, offering counsel while letting the new generation lead. His role was quieter now, but no less powerful. His shadow loomed over every major decision, every policy shift. In 2004, the torch passed again, this time to Lee's own son, Lee Hsien Loong. Critics called it dynastic. Supporters saw it as continuity. Lee became Minister Mentor, a new title for a still active mind. He would remain a fixture in Singapore's political life for another 7 years. Even as he aged, his intellect never dulled. Though no longer at the helm, Lee Kuan Yew remained the moral compass of a nation he had willed into existence. Behind every policy, every speech, and every bold decision stood a man guided by an unshakable code. Lee Kuan Yew was not merely a politician. He was a strategist, a philosopher-statesman, fiercely pragmatic, endlessly disciplined, and singularly focused on one goal: the survival and success of Singapore. To Lee, democracy was not a birthright, but a luxury. He believed that freedom without responsibility led to disorder, and that a developing nation could not afford that chaos. What a country needs to develop, he once said, is discipline more than democracy. That belief often put him at odds with Western ideals. He censored the press, silenced critics, and didn't shy away from using defamation suits to maintain control. Yet he didn't hide it. He defended it calmly, unapologetically. Because to him, it worked. He championed meritocracy, multiracial harmony, and clean governance, arguing that performance should always outweigh promises. He promoted English as the language of business, but ensured that ethnic cultures remained intact. It wasn't just about growth, it was about balance. Privately, he lived simply. No luxury cars, no lavish homes, just morning swims, a sharp mind, and quiet devotion to his wife and country. He read obsessively, studied leaders from Napoleon to Churchill, but never imitated. Lee Kuan Yew led on his own terms. "I've spent my life, so much of it, building up this country. There's nothing more I need to do," he once said. "At the end of the day, what have I got? A successful Singapore. What have I given up? My life." Lee Kuan Yew didn't want to be loved. He wanted to be respected. And more than that, he wanted results. His legacy is not just in the policies he enacted, but in the values he lived by: discipline, duty, determination. Today, Singapore stands as a global success story. A nation of just 6 million people, with one of the world's strongest passports, highest GDP per capita, and lowest crime rates. Its port is among the busiest on earth. Its education system is world-class. It's a civil service admired globally. This was the house that Lee Kuan Yew built. To many, he was Asia's most visionary statesman, a model for disciplined governance, a man who bent history to his will and made the improbable inevitable. Barack Obama called him one of the greatest strategists of our time. Deng Xiaoping sent envoys to learn from him. Even critics admired his results. At home, he was revered, but not without reservation. To some Singaporeans, Lee was a guardian. To others, a gatekeeper. His tight control of the press, politics, and civil liberties raised personal freedom and political openness concerns. Was it stability or suppression, vision or authoritarianism? The debate still lingers.
Hello, everybody. I just want to welcome the Minister Mentor of Singapore. This is one of the legendary figures of Asia in the 20th and 21st centuries. He is somebody who helped to trigger the Asian economic miracle. Singapore has been an outstanding friend and ally of the United States for many, many years. And so I am very much looking forward to the opportunity to hearing from the Minister Mentor his views on the evolving situation in Asia as I prepare for my upcoming trip both to Singapore and to other key nations in the region. And so I'm very grateful that he took the time. Welcome. And on behalf of the American people, we want to say thank you to the people of Singapore for being such outstanding friends.
Thank you, Mr. President, for those very warm words. I'm especially privileged to see you at a time of renewal and change in America, and during a period of transition where the world order is changing. And I look forward to hear your views on how you see the world evolving and America's role in it, which is crucial to the stability and prosperity of East Asia.
Thank you very much. All right.
When Lee Kuan Yew died on March 23, 2015, the nation mourned. Tens of thousands stood in the rain to pay their respects. Flags flew at half-mast. A chapter of history closed. But a new generation has risen, more global, more vocal, more demanding of transparency. Lee's model has delivered prosperity. The question now is, can it evolve? He once said, "I have no regrets. I've spent my life building this country, and I leave it in good hands." Lee Kuan Yew's legacy is not set in stone. It lives in the streets, systems, and spirit of Singapore. A man who once said, "Whoever governs Singapore must have that iron in him," did just that. And in doing so, he reshaped not just a city, but the story of a people.
You see, the whole of my adult life I had believed in Malaysian merger and the unity of these two territories. You know, as a people connected by geography, economics, and ties of kinship, would you mind if we stop for a while?
But in the end, whatever the system, however ingenious, is the quality of the men who run it that's decisive. For it is they who decide what to make out of the whole society and how to get people to give of their best. The Singapore system has worked. It will continue to work. Only if you have honest men, able men, dedicated men, men who can make you give of your best. That way, you can reach out for the stars. The other way, something for nothing. So many countries, it ends in disappointment and perdition. As long as I have a say, you are not choosing that soft option. I'll make you work for it. Thank you. And get the people of Singapore, help me teach you a lesson you won't forget. And I'm prepared to start all over again. Or stop it. Get back to work, restore discipline, then argue your case. Took them 65 minutes. And they decided, okay, it isn't worth the fight. Why? Because they know they'll lose. They know that I'm prepared to ground the airline. They know that I can get the airline going again without them. And let there be no mistakes about this. Whoever governs Singapore must have that iron in him, or give it up. This is not a game of cards. This is your life and mine. I've spent a whole lifetime building this. And as long as I'm in charge, nobody's going to knock it down.
Today, Singapore is a nation built not on natural resources, but on human will, discipline, foresight, and one man's unrelenting belief that a small country could think big. Lee Kuan Yew left behind no myth, no cult, no monuments in his name, only a functioning country. One of the most extraordinary transformations in modern history. Mr. Lee once said, "Even from my sickbed, even if you're going to lower me into the grave and I feel that something is going wrong, I will get up." He's gone now, but his imprint is indelible. Lee Kuan Yew, the man who turned a port into a nation. Thank you for watching this episode of Real Life Legends. If you enjoyed this biography, subscribe for more stories of leaders who changed the world.